Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka I'm back this time with the top tier decks for you to secure this new medal. I guess it's kind of this new badge, right? To put on display for your profile on Pokemon TCG Pocket. But today we're going to be talking about the win streak event and some different decks that you can play with and hopefully secure those wins. So let's get to those deck lists. But before we get to those, let me share with you a brand new article that I just contributed to. If you make your way to the Pokemon Zone website, you will be able to check out the new tier list that I helped contribute, featuring a couple of other awesome people from the community. You got Goob, who's won a bunch of tournaments in Pokemon Pocket, and then you've got Trav, who is the person that helps basically make a very huge tournament. They are the leads and the original organizer of the Pocket Legends League. So two really big pieces of the community contributing with me on this tier list that kind of go into detail on some of the different pros and cons of these decks and why we've got them ranked in these specific tiers. Brand new feature in the article too, a little category I would refer to as Metacall. Definitely worth checking out. I'll leave the link in the description, but Metacalls are basically decks that, depending on how the meta goes and how the meta shapes up, you can definitely take one of those decks and win a pretty big weekend tournament, maybe the Ursa Day tournament, or maybe the Pocket Legends League tournament. I don't know. Maybe you'll win both. Maybe you'll go back to back. But let's talk about these decks that you can use for the win streak event. I took all of these decks from recent tournament performances. Either they were first place or they definitely got top cut in these tournaments. And I thought that these were really good deck lists, and all of these can work. But basically, you're going to need to get 5 wins in a row, and I'm here to tell you some of the best decks that you can do this with, depending on what cards you have. I'll try to give you some substitutes as well as we go through each of these deck lists. So the first deck list is arguably the best deck in the game, although it is hard countered by fighting type, especially the Rampardos EX, or excuse me, the Rampardos and Sudowoodo deck with Lucario that just recently won the Ursa Day Pocket League Pocket Tournament. So looking at this deck, you've got Arceus and Dialga, Mew EX as a bit of technology to help you basically hit bigger numbers potentially and return one-hit KO some of those EX Pokemon that you may see go into the active spot. You've got the Healing Shaman as well that helps extend the life of your Pokemon, and sometimes it goes ahead and takes Cyrus from a active card, which your opponent could activate, to a inactive card because now all of the Pokemon on your bench are healed, or their target that they wanted to snipe is now officially healed. So Shaman's got a lot of good things going on for it. There's also a new Shaman going on that has seen some play, and it's from the new set Triumphant Light, and it basically, as long as it's on your bench, it reduces your retreat cost by 1 for your active basic Pokemon. So very popular card, especially in these Arceus Dialga decks. When you take a look at the rest of the deck list, you got Double Cape, which I think is a very good card to play in this deck and definitely necessary. And then you've also got 2 Leafs. You've got a Mars, which is a very good card whenever it is live for basically after you've got one Pokemon knocked out. It's pretty good. And then you've got Double Potion, Double Research, and Sabrina, along with a pairing. I believe that is a Giovanni and Cyrus. So you've got some one-of technology in there that's really impactful. You've got, the regular Arceus Dialga package. This deck is really good at what it does. Basically, the main idea is that you get your Dialga into the active. By the time it has 2 energy, then you can use it to ramp your Arceus or your Mew. You go ahead and, fill your bench when your Arceus EX is ready to attack, and you can hit for 130. And again, you've got Giovanni to fix some of that damage. You've got Mars to fix that, just in case you get an early EX knocked out. And then you got Sabrina and Cyrus, so that way you can target different Pokemon that you may want to knock out on the bench. In terms of substitutes, again, feel free to try out the Shaman that reduces retreat cost. you're more than welcome to replace the Mew EX. Although, honestly, I would probably keep playing that until I see that it's really bad. Notably, it is really bad into Rampardos, just like, a lot of cards in this deck, right? But again, you could definitely try out cards like Rocky Helmet if you are wanting to try to increase your damage output as well. Maybe you're coming up short on that 160 damage in a lot of cases. And, outside of that, I would say, those are probably the two best replacements or alternate cards. Assuming you don't like Mars, you could obviously add in maybe another Pokemon tool. That would probably be where my go-to would be. I don't know that you would want to add more basic Pokemon, but again, like if you're just dead set on not playing Mars, you've got a lot of options, right? You got the Shaman, you got the Pokemon tool. You could, even do stuff like Dawn, right? Because Dawn has pretty good synergy with Dialga. So you got a lot of options there. This is a deck that I will also continue to give you alternate card choices for, because personally I could see a big argument for -1 Hitmonlee and +1 Marshadow. Then you could obviously replace one of the Cyruses with a Sabrina. Those would probably be my two big changes to this deck. But again, this deck performed very well for somebody in a tournament, and again, it's just a very good counter into some of these decks that have a lot of high energy cost attackers. Gallade has great bulk, and you could find yourself in games where Marshadow, Hitmonlee, and Sudowoodo are carrying a bulk of your game that you're winning, and then you would also potentially be winning the game or closing the game out with Gallade when needed. So again, I think you do want some variety with the fighting Pokemon, but I definitely understand the current train of thought where people really like Hitmonlee in every fighting deck. I understand that. Also, just in case you want to play another fighting deck, I do have another fighting deck. But again, my alternates for this deck would be Marshadow. Definitely, you could look at Sabrina as well. If you wanted to really add a little bit more consistency to maybe finding some of your stage 2, you could add another Pokemon Research as well. That would definitely be a good alternate card. Outside of that, I think the deck is pretty, standard for what it's trying to do, and I think that those options are all very good for you, and I think all of them could definitely work for you. If you wanted to stick with the current best counter for that Arceus Dialga deck that you may see a lot of different variations of, here is the Rampardos Lucario deck list that has been, floating around quite a bit, and this deck is just really good at what it's trying to do. You can have that early pressure with Sudowoodo or potentially Lucario. Then you have that backup Marshadow plan for when one of your one prizers gets knocked out. And then you've got Rampardos as a finisher or a potential card where you can line it up onto something like a Mew EX. And that can just basically make the game a lot easier for you. So there's a lot of good things about this deck. In terms of alternatives, honestly, I probably would try to play this card for card as is. Maybe there's some of you that really like Hitmonlee. You could definitely throw that in there and maybe replace the Marshadow. That could possibly be the fix, or you could just replace the Sudowoodo. So up to you on that one. I would probably keep the Pokemon communications in this deck, even though, again, this is a lot of Pokemon. I know that'll be one of the first things that y'all notice. But I do think, keeping communications is very huge in this deck, so I would not want to replace it. Keep it in there. That's just my thoughts. And, I don't really see too many cards that you would really want to substitute outside of, those scenarios. So probably stick with this deck list if you're going to play this deck list. Maybe you are still kind of struggling to get some of those newer Arceus cards, or maybe you just don't have Dialgas or so on. Here is the classic Darkzone deck, and I do think that it still fits pretty well into a lot of decks right now because Magnezone is still really good whenever you can get it out and maybe make your opponent go 1-1-2 in terms of a prize map. And again, just to remind everybody, that means knocking out 2 non-EXs and then a EX. That's the 1-1-2 prize map. So maybe you can get your opponents into a lot of games like that, and even if you go up against a Arceus Dialga deck, that is a great win condition if you are able to do that. You've got the one of Sabrina, one of Cyrus, which definitely a perfect combination, in my opinion, in this deck. You've only got room for one Rocky Helmet, and the only argument I would make is maybe cutting a Drudagon for another Rocky Helmet. Another card that you could potentially add to this deck would be a Giant Cape. Perhaps you want to play, Giant Cape in here. That's definitely a card that can make your Pokemon live longer to do more damage. The other thing that I look at is maybe cutting a Darkrai EX, because most of the time you probably only want one. And, cards like cards like Pokemon Communication as a one-of can slide right into this deck and do very well, as we've seen in some other deck lists. But again, just to kind of round things up, you can definitely substitute Darkrai, you can substitute a Drudagon, you can substitute any of those cards, in my opinion. And then you could replace them with cards like Pokemon Communication, cards like another Rocky Helmet, cards like Giant Cape. I think all of those would do very well for you. And again, like the Kangaskhan, I think is a decent card, because there are going to be times where you run into Manaphy, and opening up cards like Drudagon into a Manaphy it feels really bad, just to be quite honest. So that's probably what I would look at as potential card changes and how I would view the deck. And again, if you don't know how to play this deck, it's mostly just get Magneton out on the board, start ramping it. Hopefully you have Drudagon or Kangaskhan in the active, and then you can, hopefully get to a situation where one turn you're attaching to Darkrai, only dark energies, and then, because that's the only ones that you play, and then hopefully you're charging with Magneton's abilities. The classic big raid boss Exeggutor EX deck is still around and still a decent deck that counters these fighting decks that, hey, who knows how the ladder is going to be for you, or excuse me, I guess the random match is going to, pair you up with. So maybe this is a deck that you can get a lot of success with. Plus, it is worth noting that fire decks seem to have taken a little bit of a hit, so there's not as many out there. And then, maybe the occasional Heatran, for example, from that classic Heatran, Arceus EX and Crobat deck. I made a video on that with the interviews from the person that made Top 64, so definitely check that out if you haven't checked out that video. But looking at this deck, again, the strategy is to get Exeggutor EX out on the board as fast as possible. Personally, I would cut a Sabrina and add a Pokemon Communication, just so that I can have that higher percentage to get Exeggutor EX out on the field as soon as I can. Hopefully, if you go first, you get it on turn 3 of the game, and if you go second, hopefully you get it on turn 4 of the game. Giant Cape is huge because it's going to allow your executes to survive crucial breakpoints in the early game, which may come up and may be game winning because you have that Giant Cape. Potion, very good. You'll notice this deck is not playing Arita, and if you wanted to play Arita, I would say you would probably have to cut the Rocky Helmet and a Sabrina, and then you would have to play dual type energy along with the Mythical Island execute. Personally, I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's probably a little bit greedy, and hey, if you're going to do those shenanigans, I would probably just play Leafeon and Celebi. As far as replacements, again, I just think that you could probably get away with playing another research, or another Pokemon Communication, and then hey, if you wanted to do that, I would probably look at cutting one of the Sabrinas. Outside of that, maybe you could squeeze in a Mars or a red card if you wanted to give them some disruption. And again, like the cards that I would look at cutting are probably one Sabrina first, and then maybe the Rocky Helmet, and then worst case, maybe a Potion. I think everything else is pretty much, perfect as is. Let's just say you wanted to play Leafeon and Celebi. You could still potentially play dual type energies. I think that would be something that you could get away with in this deck, just because Leafeon's ability, when it's in the active, it can generate those grass type energies. So again, when I look at this deck, it's basically trying to do what Exeggutor EX decks have been doing for the past, month or so. And basically it's get Leafeon EX on the board as soon as possible. Then once you get it on, hopefully you can build it up to do 70 right away. And then from there, you're loading energies up onto your bench, hopefully on a Celebi. So the strategy is very powerful when it gets going, and it's a very good deck. There's some weird matchups with it right now, like Arceus Dialga probably beats this deck a fair amount of times out of 10. I would probably say like it's got an advantage, the Arceus Dialga deck does. So that's something to keep in mind. However, this deck should do pretty well into those fighting decks, assuming, you know, you can get your heal. Now, also, let's talk about this deck list a little bit more. It's playing double Arita, double Erica. So this is the maximum Greed Lord list where you're trying to play 2 energy types to maximize your healing, and only 1 potion because you are getting that double Arita in this deck. You know, you can make an argument, cut a potion, add a Pokemon communication just to make sure that you're hitting those Leafeons, because if you don't hit Leafeon, there's going to be times where this deck just insta loses, or, you know, basically has no chance to win the game because of the wrong energy. So that's definitely a possibility, especially if you get, you know, blocked from going into Leafeon somehow, or, you know, you just never find Leafeon. So again, looking at this deck, I would probably look at another Pokemon communication. I wouldn't probably want to cut the Cyrus or the Sabrina. I could potentially cut the X speed, but honestly, the X speed like allows you to kind of like get out of bad starts in some scenarios, but sometimes it just doesn't even matter. But again, the potion and the X speed would be the cards that I would look at potentially swapping out to maybe add another Pokemon communication. If you wanted to play a different card in here as well, maybe, you know, you take out the X speed to add another potion. Sure, that's definitely an option. But again, just trying to give you options just in case maybe you're missing some of these cards, even though I know a lot of you have these cards. That wraps up all of the decks that I wanted to give you. These are all considered very high tier decks. So I know that there's other decks out there that you guys can use, because I want you to remember one thing. If you play well, you know, and you continue just playing to the top of your abilities, you know, a lot of the time you can get even 5 wins in a row with just a deck that you're very comfortable with. So don't feel like you must play one of these decks to go ahead and, you know, get that medal or that badge. But just kind of remember, you know, hey, if I play well and I know what I'm doing, you know, I still have a good chance to get this achievement. So keep that in mind. And again, I want to just thank you so much for taking time out of your day for me to be background noise. Maybe you learned something, or hey, maybe it was entertaining. But until next time, I will catch you later. Peace.